Yeah, what this class is what we decided to call it was Career Vision Demystified. And the reason why we said that is because career vision teaches us what to do and how to do it, but it doesn't teach us why we're doing it. What should we be looking for and what does that look like? And I get this question a lot. So I brought it to Austin and Brian and said, hey, this is something I think people just want a little bit more information on, not just what they're supposed to do, but why they're supposed to do it. So that is our goal around today. And I heard what a lot of you guys' goals were. So I'm going to make sure I can kind of help you guys along that way too. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Heather Lamb, and I am a MAPS coach. I've been a MAPS coach since 2016 now. So I'm going on 5 years. It's my 5th year as a coach. Before that, I was an individual agent and had a team. So I had a team in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and then I ended up expanding into St. Louis, Missouri. So I was into another state. So I did a lot of this hiring process, and I did a lot of things wrong in the hiring process. I think I went through 3 admin before I actually found my admin. So
that's super fun.
I know, right? Isn't it? Because admin's the funnest one to hire when that's not your personality. So all that being said, what the goal is what I learned, and you'll learn a lot about me today because I did become an open book, and you're going to see pretty much my entire KPA. You're going to watch a lot of it live when we do it. But really what I wanted you guys to know is that I'm a very optimistic person. So I think everyone is awesome, and I believe in everyone, which is probably why I'm a coach. But it also means that I'm going to miss a lot of things along the way. And what I learned was how important the entire process is, and that each step holds for a different purpose. So my goal personally today is to make sure you understand what the steps are, what you should be looking for, why are you even doing this step, and just to make sure that you're like bulletproofing your hire, so you don't have to make the same mistakes I made.
Yeah. And if I haven't mentioned Brian Wentz, I've been a real estate agent now for 25 years, which makes me sound really, really old. I don't know why. I've been an agent. I had a mega team. I was a team leader. I was a general manager, now an operating principal. Got about 900 agents in our combined operations. And I've hired, I'm not quite at 600 people, but I've hired close to 600 people. So I've spent a lot of time in this process. I've also, we talk about being committed to mastery when we talk about the 6 personal perspectives. Mastery, someone's in mastery when they go back and they go back and they go back and they take the same class over and over again. And it's not because I'm slow, although maybe that could be the case on some days. I don't know. She'd speak to that. However, I've been through either Recruit Select, which was the precursor to career visioning, and career visioning probably 20, 22 times at least, and I probably have lost count. So I've got more of these manuals in my office than I care to share. And it's interesting, career visioning is actually what Gary called the hiring process in the early days, but then it became Recruit Select, and you had to start to read like tea leaves and crazy bell curves and all this kind of stuff. And it got really, really complex. And it was interesting, but it was, they were normalizing behavior against yourself. And what's really powerful about this, and we're going to talk about this today, is this is where Keller Williams has really normalized behavior within an individual role. And so while the old style gave you a lot of clues as to how they would succeed or where and when they would succeed, this really gives you a lot more clarity in it, and it really brings thinking together with behavior. So, and yes, as Heather said, this is really about making sure that you guys have the clarity. Now, I missed clarity of the process. I missed what were you guys here for? Just
so half of them have taken career visioning, half haven't.
Okay.
The majority of them, some of them have some specific hires they're looking for.
Okay.
Some of them just want to understand how to read a KPA. Like,
Okay.
what does that even mean? So
Good.
That's really where we stand right now.
Okay, good.
And I don't know where everyone in the Zoom land, what their goals are, but feel free to learn best hiring practice.
Yep, that was it. There we go. Okay, got it. Yep, so hiring practices. So a couple of ground rules, just put your thinking caps on, be present. If you're on Zoom, you've got, how many people do we have on Zoom, Austin?
There's 5.
5, okay,
Are we
good.
recording this? By the way?
We are
recording.
We are recording. Thinking caps on, be present. If you're on Zoom, just flip your cameras on. We'd love to see your faces. Use the chat box also. Austin will be moderating. Participate. This is really a two-way conversation. We're here to flex this class around your questions and concerns and needs. We're going to walk through and explain the hows and the whys, and yet this is your class. Share ahas. if you have an aha, it probably means somebody else also had something similar, and the entire class gets better when you share. Eliminate distractions, just be present while you're here, be curious and have fun. That's the most important thing. You guys good with that?
Yeah.
Okay,
And
good.
if anyone that's been to my class before, I know a couple of you, I really do like an interactive class. So I really encourage you to ask questions, because I promise you, if you have the question, everybody else out here has the question too.
She's very good with awkward silence.
Yeah, I'm trained to know what awkward silence is.
Good. So let's talk about a couple of objectives today, and I'll try to kind of move this off to the side so you guys can see this. We're talking about demystifying the process. So we're going to break down the individual steps and really go into the why behind the steps so that you understand, like, why is it? And we tend to find a lot of people will shortcut a lot of the steps, and that's where things go off the rails really quickly. And 6 months later, you're going, why did that hire not work out? And you do the post-mortem and you realize, oh, there were like 15 things I missed in the process. So we're going to talk about each step and why it matters. We're going to talk about some best practices and some myth understandings, because there are some myths that are attached to some of these steps. And then lastly, we just want to improve your hiring skills. And I think one of the things that I see is that the challenge with agent hiring oftentimes is they just have not hired enough people. And when you get in that mode of being in mastery around hiring, you're looking for something, and you'll hear me use this term today, I call it squid eye. And squid eye, Susan Scott in Fierce Conversations talks about the first time she went squid diving, and she came back up and the guy said, well, did you see any squid? And she said, no, there were like, I couldn't see any. He goes, well, you didn't know what to look for. They're all over down there. I saw tons of them. And when he told her what to look for, she went back down and she's like, oh, now I can see them all. Talent is that same way. You've got to have squid eye to be able to identify and see that rare find that will stand out differently from everyone else. So that's what we're going to be talking about. Heather, you want to talk about talents?
I would love to talk about talent. So for those of you that have taken career visioning, this is how they basically start the entire class. And so what they say is talent is a motivated person who is a perfect match for the job that is the logical next step along their career path. Clear as day, right? You guys understand that completely? Yes or no? Because if you actually read this, this is a very complicated sentence right there before we go any further. It is a motivated person. Well, how do you know if somebody is motivated or not? What is a motivated person, right? Like, everyone says they're motivated, but how do we actually know if they're motivated? The second one is, who is a perfect match for the job? Who is a perfect match for the job? That's the next step. Is a lot of times, don't we always say, well, they're pretty good for it. I think they could do it, you know? And so this is where it's talking about talent again. That is the next logical step along their career path. Well, next logical step along their career path, I mean, think about that one. That's a pretty tough one. So this is how they start career visioning. I think we just look at this and just basically what I like to call we snorkel on it. We don't actually scuba dive as to really what any of these things mean. And if we were to scuba dive on that, I think it becomes really clear as to why this process exists, what it really, really means, the why behind the what. So again, a perfect match is a person that is a perfect match when they have the knowledge, the skills, the track record, and personality to get the job done and are a cultural fit in line with the organization. So I really want you to keep this page, because as we're going through it, you will see that every single one of those steps is a perfect match. That's how we determine if they're a perfect match, every one of these.
And I think, yeah, so two visuals that I can give you on this. When you talk about the next logical step of their career path, I want you to visualize a swing set. And the swing set has to go backwards to go forwards. So think about someone, we're going to go all the way back to someone's past, figure out where they've been. We're going to come back and figure out where they are. And then we're going to look at what is that trajectory into the future. So it's past, present, and future. The other thing that you'll see when we talk about a perfect match, if your hand represents the ideal behavioral profile of a particular role that we're hiring, whether it's a admin, an MCA, a buyer's agent, a showing specialist, a MAPS coach, if this is the perfect fit, then what we're looking for is job behavioral compatibility, which is this. So when we talk about this is a perfect fit. the more that you get this, the more uncomfortable it becomes, the more awkward it becomes, and this is an exact opposite.
And the
fit.
more work for you.
The more work for you, the more work for them, and the greater the likelihood that they're going to burn out. We're going to talk about that. So it's really about making sure that that you understand what is the role. So let's get real clear on what we need the role to be, and then we have to get real clear on who is the person, and then are they a match? And it is like, it's a needle in a haystack sometimes. I'll be real candid. And there are times that it can be a little frustrating, as Diana Kikosa says, fascinating, and yet you persevere and you will find the talent if you follow the process.
And patience. Remember, patience is a virtue in this one, because I think most people's tendency is to take the easy way out, but you're gonna pay for it on one end or the other. You either have to do the time and the work up front, or you're gonna have to do it when you're cleaning up the mess that they left. And we'll go more into detail on that. Yeah, that is really the message that we want to get across to everyone today, is that the reason the process exists is because of all the mistakes we've all made in the thing.
Yeah,
So-
and in the old, and I don't know, I've got it in my notes here somewhere, in the old recruit select, I gotta get the title right. The old process, the first exercise that you did the first day was you calculated the cost of a bad hire. And most people on first blush would be like, well, it's an admin role, so it's like $37,000 worth of impact. Well, then you start to go to the tangibles and the intangibles, and you start to look at, one lost client, they mess up one client's transaction, and that could be 20 or 25 additional transactions over your career. They do this thing, you've got to stop to teach them, and then you've got to go do it again. On average, when you tally that up, it's on average somewhere between about $700,000 and about 1.7 million. Now that sounds like a big number, but when you do the exercise, it's really fascinating to be in a really big room, and they all come up with the same numbers about every time. So it is a slow down to speed up process.
So when we talk about career visioning, everyone just assumes it's the KBA, right? Like I even heard it a little bit in this room, but it's actually a 4-step process. There's 4 steps to the full career visioning. The first step is the screening. And so this is basically where we're going through and we're collecting the resumes, and we're determining, are they even anyone we want to have a conversation with? And we'll kind of go a little bit deeper into all of these. The interview process, where we're actually going to do the KPA and all that, perspective and commitment. So remember, as we talk about career visioning, we're not just talking about one piece, and don't get caught up in that.
Yeah. And so when we talk about the screen test, which is really step 1, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this today. The screen test is what we call the scratch and sniff. And for those of you guys that remember the old stickers, and you'd scratch them and kind of figure out what they smelled like. You have a pen. Okay, good. It is the scratch and sniff. You're just seeing, like, do they have some of the fundamentals that we're looking for or not? And at this point, a couple of key things is, first of all, follow the organizational model. One of the greatest gifts that we have in this company is we got an organizational model that says, when you get here, here's your next hire. And it's always important to understand that anytime you're stuck in your business, and this is a Gary Keller statement, you're missing either a who or you're missing a system.
Or both.
Or both sometimes, and many times the who will design the system for you, particularly if it's administrative. So recognize, are you missing a who or are you missing a system? Look at who's next on your hire. Really be thinking down the road, where am I going to be in a year, 2 years, 3 years? And I know that in my sales team, I had it mapped out about 48 months, what hire had to be made by what month to be able to be on track for the very specific goals that we had. And so it was just the next hire. Market Center is the same way, correct? Yeah. So we want to know the organizational model. We really want to do a missing persons
So when
report.
it says follow the model, remember that goes back to like what we talked about at the beginning when we were having technical difficulties. If you start questioning what you should do next, actually pull the organizational model out and look at it and see, where am I, what is it saying? And if you have questions about it, that's what Austin's here for.
Absolutely. Do a missing persons report, and this is where you start to get really clear on who are you missing. And when we talk about a missing persons report, it's, the police department puts out a all points bulletin, and they say, we're looking for this person, they're dressed this way, they're driving this vehicle. So you know if this is the person that they're putting the APB out. Think about this way in your hiring. What does the person behaviorally show up as? What do they need to be good at? And one of the best ways to be able to build your job profile, I teach to do, and it's funny, we laughed.
I laughed because this is exactly what I did too. My coach had me do this.
So we do a stop doing list. So what are all the things right now that you're doing that is below your average dollar per income or average dollar per hour? So if your income is $200,000 a year and you're working 2,400 hours a year, divide it out, figure out what your average dollar per hour is. If it's below that and it's not in the top 5 things that are on your job description as a real estate agent, that's a delegatable activity. And so that's what's going to go on to the stop doing list. Then there's the start doing list. And the start doing list is all the things that isn't even getting done because you're buried in all the other stuff. And the focusing questions to ask in that space is really, what are the things that aren't getting done that if they were would make all the difference? And if you're hiring an admin, it's overseeing your 36 touch campaign and overseeing your CRM. If you're hiring a, MCA, it's ensuring that the operations of the market center are cared for and that the financials are cared for. And so who does that person, what do they look like and what do you need them to do? And then when you're doing the scratch and sniffs, I usually will do, typically we'll run Indeed ads, we'll run ads to our existing clients. Your allied resources are some of your best sources of talent, to be real candid. So we'll run ads, we'll do mailings, we'll do phone campaigns, we'll find people, but typically you're going to need about 50 to 100 applicants or candidates that are potential candidates. We're typically going to weed those down into about 10 to 15 scratch and sniffs. So you've got to get real good at looking at the resumes, kind of separating the ho-hum from the one that you're like, this one has some trajectory on it. Progressively larger roles, progressively bigger tasks, especially if you can kind of gauge, what their career path is. In other words, are they potential talent? Are they emerging talent? Or are they proven talent? And you can kind of see that on their resumes. So you do that 15, 20 minute scratch and sniff. And then if they are good, like you like the conversation, now we go forward into the next series of processes. And I know that you have some advice on.
Yeah, so what I was gonna say is a couple of things. First of all, in the missing persons report, if you guys get really clear on what is the behaviors a person would need to have in order to do this job at a really high level, the other interesting thing is then you have a lot of clarity when you're looking through that stuff. So when he's talking about going through 100, it sounds like super overwhelming, right? Like you're like, who has time for that? But if you're real clear, then it goes really, really fast. So for those of you who aren't quite ready, it's actually a perfect time to be getting really clear on when you are ready. What does that person need to look like? What are the skills and traits they need to have? Because it'll make your life a lot easier. Same thing on the job description. For me personally, I kept a Post-it note next to my desk, and anytime I was doing something that either I absolutely hated because I wasn't good at it and it wasn't in my skills, I wrote it down, or that I realized I shouldn't be doing this. And that's before you're done, you literally could take the sticky and give it to your admin and say, this is your job description, what I need your help with. So it's a cheat sheet in essence. And okay, so on the scratch and sniff, the other thing is this could be very time consuming if you let it. So don't let it. This is my message to you is if they don't even deserve a call, don't get on a call. Figure out the ones that really stand out and shine that you want to have a conversation with. Make those first calls like 15 minutes. Don't go crazy. So that way the ones that are the real talent are where you're focusing your time. So that's just kind of my little tidbit on that one, because I do have people that have spent way too much time on those scratches. I had one client once tell me that they didn't have time to go on a listing appointment because they were doing all these scratch and sniffs. And I was like, okay, hold on.
Time out.
Let's figure out what's wrong here because we're going on the listing appointment.
And just a couple things I'm looking for. I'm looking for verbal fluency. That's something that's really big in my world. Now you have to consider your profile and the profile of the role that you're hiring to. When I'm hiring an MCA, I'm still looking for verbal fluency, but I know that their behavioral profile is gonna be like exactly the opposite of mine naturally. So I'm having to consider my audience and consider who I'm looking with, who I'm looking for. So it's verbal flow. I'm looking for people that are hungry, people that want more out of their life. They know that there's something inside them that's burning to go do something. We're looking for people that are humble, people that think of others more than they think about themselves. It doesn't mean that they're selfless, but it does mean that they're really externally focused. And we're looking for people that are smart. And when I say smart, EQ smart. They understand how to read a room. They understand how to interact with people in a way that they have high emotional intelligence. And those are 3 absolute non-negotiables for anyone that we get into business with. The way that you ask some of those questions is you just really ask them. So tell me about your last couple of roles that you've held. What did you love the best? And maybe what did you least enjoy about those roles? And they'll tell you. They're real honest. It's real interesting. Then one of my questions I'll ask is what would make something the right next role for you? Like if you did something that was your dream job, what would be next for you? If you ask, then the next question is, well, what would make something the wrong next role? And if they say, well, I don't know, then you ask them, well, so if you were sitting in a room by yourself for 8 to 10 hours a day looking at a computer screen, how would that work for you? Oh, no, I wouldn't like that. Okay, so tell me what would be something that would be the wrong role then? Well, yeah, I need people contact and I need this. And, I couldn't sit in a room and stare at a screen all day. Like I couldn't do that. I remember hiring for a compliance officer in Des Moines, and I ended up finding a lady who had done the same job for, I think it was 38 years. And in the interview, the pre-screen, she said that she had sat in the same office in front of the same terminal. The terminal had just changed over time, and she had done this. I'm going, okay, this is kind of interesting because I needed her to work from home and stare at a computer screen for 8 hours a day. Okay, I've got someone that has some. So that scratch and sniff is really critical to starting to just flush out who they are. And then you are looking for the skills. And I remember hiring for an MCA that when I did my stop doing and start doing list, I went, I actually need this MCA to have some graphic design skills. I wouldn't have even thought that was on an MCA's description, but it was for that market center where we were at that time.
Okay, so steps 2 through 4. So these are really the steps that we're going to be focusing on today. So if you guys look at your packet, this is where Seth has these right here. So this is the how to use this guide. This is also a lot of these pages are in the actual job consultation. So if you were to pull your own KPA and you got to the consultation guide, all of this stuff exists. So don't feel like, it's all right there. The greatest thing about this particular one is that it actually really tells you word for word, and we'll go over that in a lot more detail, what to say. So if you look, there's actually 4 steps. 2, 3, and 4 are different in the KPA process. So if you look, step 2 is the interview part. So that's where we're interviewing the person. That's the job fit, the thought process, the life story, and the motivational. We'll go into more detail on those because that's what we're focusing on. And then step 3 is perspective. And this is group references and defense. And then the last one is commitment, which is the expectations, dialogue, and the offer. So these are the steps that we're going to be focusing on today, step 2, 3, and 4, and the why behind it. Why are we even doing this?
Yeah. And what's the only thing that is missing from this visual is that right kind of above this box right here, there is kind of this prep process that we're going to talk about as we get into this that is a time consuming, or it does take I shouldn't say it's time consuming, it takes some focus. You really want to pause. And I think a lot of people skip that step and just go right into the verification without having actually looked at things like job considerations 1 and 2. So let's talk about that.
One other thing too is, just so you know, the other question I get a lot is, how long does this take? This looks like it takes forever. So Brian and I sketched it out, and that's probably what you're thinking. Which, by the way, raise your hand, ask questions, because somebody's thinking it, I can address it. So anyway, this takes about 8 to 10 hours, and we'll kind of talk about how to split it up in your time. You could do this in a week, you just can't do it in a day. So, but it's about 8 to 10 hours.
Yeah,
average.
and I think, we say at Keller Williams, per person, yes, per candidate. We say we're slow to hire and quick to fire. And slow to hire doesn't mean that it has to take a month or 2 months. It just means that we're going to slow down and respect the process. Okay. So it is involved. And, I think that when you think about it from the perspective that the right key hire can change the trajectory of your business forever. The wrong key hire can cause you a tremendous amount of pain, frankly, at the office and at home. Because let's face it, our business doesn't exist in isolation. You got messy stuff at the office, you're bringing that home to your spouse and your family and your kids. And so take the time to slow down and do it right, master the process, and your world will get really big really quick. And the other thing that I would say on this is if you're like myself or like Heather, if you have a really, really big vision for your life, in career visioning, we do a vision map. And Gary's tells us that you can have as many boxes on that vision map. And on ours, there's a lot of boxes. There's a lot of businesses, a lot of entities, a lot of outcomes that we're building and building towards. But you have to pick one box and live in that box and then go find a who for every other box. So, we kind of wait to turn a box on until we go find the who that's the right who to go launch that entity or go, run that part of the organization. Austin was obviously a product of the career visioning process. When you're looking for a key leader, it probably takes closer to 15 to 20 hours to be able to slow down and really make sure that you're really, really, really nailing it. You're really clear on the congruency. So let's talk about a few myths.
Yeah, these are the myth understandings. So like you guys said, there's a lot of things that people think about KPA and thinking it's the career visioning process. So.
But Heather, I did part of it.
You did
I did
most
some of it.
So what happens if you just do some of it? It's like a puzzle. It's like putting together a puzzle and missing the center. Like you can kind of get sort of some squares on it, but you don't actually see the full picture of what you're supposed to create. So that's where, we're going to say this a lot, the entire process, no matter how painful it could be, because it is like baking a cake and you need all of the ingredients. And if you leave out one key ingredients, you're not going to be able to eat your cake.
Yeah, and I've bailed at every single step of the process with a candidate. So at every step, it's red light, green light. And by the way, part of the reason you go through the entire process is because not only are you learning about the candidate's learning about you. They're learning about, is this someone who I want to attach my wagon to?
And you actually want them to figure that out sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Can they work with you or not?
Yeah, you got it. So Heather, I already did the KPI with them. I know everything I need to know. None of the other steps matter.
So everyone makes the assumption that the KPA is the career visioning process. In actuality, it's only 20% of whether that person is going to be a fit for your team or not. So while you're looking at the behavior and you're looking at the skills, it doesn't take into effect a lot of the other things in that person's world, which is what those other steps are in place to do, is to help kind of fact check that. And we'll go a little deeper on that too, but it's one step, not the entire process.
So Heather, I sent my candidate the KPA. They're a perfect match. I'm going to go hire them. Woohoo! I love them. They're awesome.
Again, so behavior and intelligence are only one small piece of the puzzle. And what he was talking about, hiring somebody that's hungry, humble, and smart, that doesn't humble doesn't show up in the KPA. Hungry doesn't show up in the KPA. Smart does show up in the KPA. So, by the way, that's from The Ideal Team Player. So if that's a book you guys might want to read, it's called The Ideal Team Player, and that's where they come up with hungry, humble, and smart. So that's what you're looking for when you're looking for a good person.
I sent them the KPA. They're not a match. I'm just going to move on. I'm not even going to verify it. There's not even a reason to talk to this person.
So how many people have thought this before? I just am curious. Is this something like you just see it as a mismatch? Well, this is one of the biggest myths, in my opinion, people make. First of all, if we've taken them far enough and we ask them to take an hour-long behavioral assessment, I personally think it's within it's our duty to validate it. I'll go a little deeper on that before you freak out. But here's the other thing is maybe they're not a match for that particular role, but they're really, really talented and they could fit somewhere else in your world, or possibly you could help them fit somewhere so that you're starting to create your bench And I'm gonna go a little deeper in that, but I also get that question as well. So just so you know, if you need to validate it, go ahead.
I think also sometimes you realize that they didn't follow instructions to take it.
That's exactly why we validated as well, is that they didn't follow instructions, and we'll talk about that later too. But the interesting thing about this as well is if you really feel like, okay, I had some questions when I looked at their resume and now I can see that their KPIs and a match, you can always validate the personal report versus the report that's for the specific position. The personal report basically takes out all of the intelligence ones and just focuses on the behavior. And you can do that one in about 20 minutes. So just so you know, if it isn't a match and you know it's not a match, just care enough about the person to do the personal validation with them. Let them walk away feeling better about themselves, because by the way, now they probably can at least be a client. So if nothing else.
Yeah. We have, I can think of 2 absolute rock stars we have in our organization that did not validate well for the role that they were in, but from the scratch and sniff and just from the conversations, they were talent and they ended up on other seats of the bus. So, you know, don't assume. So a couple of tips for success: follow the entire process. We've said that a lot. If you want 1 in 100 talent, you actually have to talk to 100 people.
And so, by the way, this was for those of you that know Diana Kokoska and Tony DeCello, they were both, they created mass coaching, and Tony is probably one of the #1 coaches in all of the world. And I remember one time he was talking to us coaches and he told us this story, and as simple as it sounds, it was like, oh, well, okay, that makes sense. The reason why we're not getting that awesome, amazing talent is because I didn't look at 100 resumes. I only looked at 3 and tagged on to that. So he's saying if you want one, take the time to get it all.
Yeah. Check your behavior. Recognize, like, I know if I'm sitting down with a team leader candidate, we could probably talk like all day, because we're both IDs, we're both IIs. You know, we're going to be very similar creatures. Stay in neutral. Meet them at their own ground and go in recognizing what is their natural behavior and what is yours. MCA hires are one place I have to massively check my behavior, because behaviorally they're wired differently than I am. And so I've got to kind of meet them at their space. I've got to be a little more S-like. I can't be real direct and, you know, like the driver, because they're not going to react well to that. And so think about how that interaction happens. And then always be looking for talent everywhere. Everywhere. My very best showing specialist I ever hired, I had gone to someone wanted to go to a Mongolian buffet place, not the place I go to eat, but that's where they wanted to go. And the service was kind of slow, but there was this one lady that was just running around taking care of everything. And finally I said, hey, come over here. Like, what's the story here? And she said, well, you know, our general manager quit one day, and, you know, I have all these customers that come in on a regular basis. I love my customers. I just think about them all day long and love my customers. And so I went in the back and said, well, who orders food? And they said, well, the general manager did. And she's like, well, how do you do it? And then she starts telling the story. Well, then she started doing scheduling, and then she started working extra shifts because she wanted to make sure that her clients that came in, that she saw them on a regular basis. And I'm going, this is really interesting. This kid was probably making, I don't know what, 10, 12 bucks an hour. Last year, she probably made $85,000, $95,000 a year as a showing specialist. You know, she's doing like 12, 14 deals a month. It's crazy. Okay. So look for talent.
The other thing on check, beware of your own behavior, is remember when you're validating the KPA, it's about them. So even if the KPA says the exact same thing that your KPA says, don't say that. Just keep focusing and keep it. And sometimes it's really hard for us high eyes to not say, oh yeah, that's us too. Yeah, you can't do that. You just have to leave it about them and make sure that you're checking your behavior and constantly thinking about them. Once you hire them, if you want to share yours and laugh about the fact that you're the same, that's great. Just don't do it during that process.
Yeah, stay in neutral.
And that's it through all steps. That's not just the KPA, by the way.
So with that being said.
Yeah.
Do you want to hire somebody that's the same as you, or do you want to hire somebody
It depends on the job. So if you're hiring to replace yourself as lead listing agent, you probably want somebody that has some similar characteristics as you. If you're hiring an administrative person, you probably don't. So you're looking for what the job behavior is. Now, on that same vein, you are looking for somebody who's within your culture. And we will talk about that, because somebody could be a perfect fit and a perfect match, but their culture is different than your culture, it's probably never gonna work. And that's again why some of this process is important, because there's more pieces than just the one KPA piece. So to answer your question, just making sure that they're within the culture of your team, whatever that is. And that's where the group interview, we'll talk more about that too.
My wife and I scored exactly the same on the KPA, but we're complete opposite personalities, so.
Yeah, well, and that's a testament to the fact that it's behavior and thinking, but there's a lot of other traits that change who you are. I'm gonna add to what Heather said and say it also depends on your fit in your role. So in 2014, I had the #1 agent at Olive Keller Williams in my markets here in Des Moines. 242 units as a solo practitioner, no foreclosures, no REOs. These were all resale units, and she did it with one admin. Okay, she's working like 18 hours a day. And she came to us because she said, I know that I'm not doing it right, and I just want a better quality of life. I'm good at this, but I want a better quality of life. Well, when we talk about the behavioral fit, she was the exact opposite. Like behaviorally, if you'd have looked at her page, at her job fit page, it would have said she has no business being an agent, which is why you have to look at track record and other things. She had a really, really big why that drove her, and that big why is what caused her to get up out of bed. In her case, she needed to hire people that were like her because that was like an administrative type person. And so it's about the role, but it's also about your natural behavior. So good.
So when we talked about, this is in your packet. This is actually my personal job match. So I told you guys are gonna get to know a lot about me and that I was being pretty vulnerable today. So when we talk about validating the KPA, part of the prep is always ask for this job match page, because it's separate than the job fit consultation guide that you get. And the reason why is it's part of the picture of the person. So first of all, there's a lot of misunderstandings around this page. Like, what are we looking for? So if somebody is a low fit at something, does that mean they can't do the job? No. And the reason, so what do you think these mean? Does anyone have any idea or any clue outside of you, because I probably preached this to you, outside, of what those things even mean and what you're supposed to be looking for?
I think it's an indication of what a particular person might, for lack of a better phrase, excel at.
Perfect. So what somebody might excel at or not excel at could be either way. Anything else that anyone reads from this? So here's how, I'll just kind of describe to you how I see this page. So just because, like he said, just because somebody's a low fit does not mean that they won't crush that role over and over and over again. Just because somebody's a high fit doesn't mean that they won't fail at it. What this actually is saying to you is based on the top 20% of people in the role in the Keller Williams system, these are the characteristics that they fall in terms of the role. I always look at high things as battery fillers. These are the things that we do naturally really, really well, and we kind of get a little bit of a high when we do it. So if those of us that, are listing agents, when you go and you get your listing, I mean, how euphoric is that feeling when you walk out the door and you just took a really good listing? That is a battery filler. The low ones are what I call battery drainers. So we can do the job, but we actually have to exert energy. Some people have a whole lot more capacity to exert the energy than other people do. But what this is really talking about is longevity in a role. Okay, so it's saying if they're a high fit, there's a really good chance that they're going to stay in that role for a really long time because they enjoy it, they're good at it, and it gives them energy. If you hire somebody who is a medium or a low fit, they're having to exert some energy for that role, and at some point in time, especially the lows, they're probably going to leave you. So if we're really looking at making a hire that's going to be a long-term hire, we don't want to settle for the lows. Sorry.
No, I was just going to.
Yeah, we don't want to settle for the lows, because if we're settling for the lows at this point, then we're knowing that we're probably going to lose them. Now, we'll kind of go into more detail on this, but I like to talk about it before you get into the validation. Let's just say somebody's a medium. So they're exerting energy for it, or maybe even a low, but you can really see their talent for a job you don't have available yet. So let's just say team listing agent, hi. So you know that you're gonna need to replace yourself pretty soon, but you're not ready yet. It's still okay to put them somewhere for a short period of time, if they're talent, if all the rest of these are going, knowing that you're going to move them there. So I do wanna give that little caveat so that people understand, this is more about long-term staying within a role, not whether they're gonna succeed or not succeed.
Yep.
Do you have anything you wanna add to this?
No, I think the other, well, yeah, I do actually. So you will sometimes see the job match page and you'll see like one or two highs, a whole bunch or a couple of mediums and a whole bunch of lows. That's always a red flag. That's either an indicator that they didn't take the time to actually take the assessment properly. So that's one thing. And I don't know that I like characterizing it this way, but it sometimes can be an indicator that we just have a whole bunch of behaviors that really don't fit well in the basket that is Keller Williams. And so, that can sometimes be truly intelligence, that can sometimes be just EQ. So when you see that, be curious, but that can be a red flag. Something's happened.
One other thing I want to share about this too, real quick, sorry about that, is this changes within Keller Williams. So I actually updated mine right before this class and it was different percentage wise in a couple of the areas than it was the last time I did it. So if you've got somebody that's taken it, and I think I updated it like 6 months ago, like it wasn't even that long ago. So if you do, always go back to the MCA and ask for the updated version because they can just refresh it and give you an updated version, maybe even get one for yourself. Because again, what Keller Williams is doing is they're taking the top 20% of people in each role. What are the characteristics and behavior? And the more that it gets in there, the more that it's learning. My other aha is on my other one, I actually had a whole bunch of highs. And now they've kind of started, I think they're starting to shorten up those things because they have more clarity on that, okay, she can do these jobs, but she's not gonna wanna be an assistant anything for a long time. I mean, that was not a good role for me. So I used to be high in a lot of those and now I'm medium because they know I'm not gonna succeed long-term in that role.
You got a question?
I was just gonna say that English could be their second language.
Absolutely.
Well, and that is one of the other issues, and I've seen that a lot, by the way, is that is one of the questions that I ask if I hear somebody with an accent when I take it, because the word might not be the same. There is a Spanish version I've heard out there. I know, I've got to find it. So reach out to Leslie and see if I can get that. But there is this, I've heard that they started doing a Spanish version. I hope they start doing more and more because there's a lot of talented people out there that English isn't their first language.
With as many countries as we've expanded into, I would expect that they probably would do that with time, but it's a process.
And the other thing I want to say is some of these roles weren't on there. Some of these roles they started creating, like coach actually wasn't ever on there before. And so about a year ago, they requested all the MAPS coaches to turn their PBAs into them. And I decided, I think they did that so they could start rating people as a.
So when someone asks you, why do you want me to take this test? What's the best way to
Well,
say
first
it?
of all, it's because you still called it a test.
Right.
Nobody wants to take a test. Like, let's be real. And so basically you just explain to them, and we're gonna kind of go over that a little bit. He's got a great cue up on that we're gonna do.
Placeholder.
But really what you're telling them is like this, we have a process that we follow at Keller Williams. And it's gonna look at your natural behavior styles and what you're good at. And our goal at Keller is to make sure you're in the position that is utilizing you at the highest and best that there is. And so as you go through the process, you're gonna learn a lot about yourself. It's all gonna be good because it is a positive, and I always make sure I say that too.
Yeah, I agree.
That help?
Well said.
I was just asking just because I know sometimes as agents, we get that question like.
Yeah.
what is this assessment?
One other thing I wanna say about this piece is don't be attached to the outcome. Once they take and this is the hard part because we're hiring for a specific role, but we have to take that piece out of it. And now as the validation starts, every single part of that interview process has to be about them and about getting them to the space that they're gonna be their highest and best. And by the way, if you do that, there's so many benefits that are gonna come from it for you.
Yeah, so I think we talked about all this. It doesn't say that they can't do the job, but they will burn out. Highly intelligent people can adapt their behavior. Typically 6 to 9 months, it starts to become kind of the period at which Beyond that, it's hard for them to adapt their behavior. So they can be someone you need them to be. They can be someone who they're not short-term, but long-term it just won't work out.
So, who's seen this page before? Okay, good, so you even looked at it, that's awesome. Most of the time, people don't even look at this page. So this is in the job consultation guide, and this is how they separate up what we're talking about. And so we just kind of wanted to hit them a little bit today, just so that we're shining a light on what they mean. By the way, don't be afraid to go back and pull this sheet and put it next to the next page when we get to it, to remind yourself of what that actually means. Because sometimes our definition of what it is isn't what this definition of it is. So remember, somebody that's assertive, you're either really, really reserved and probably aren't going to tell you anybody what their opinion is, or they're going to be in your face and aggressive. That's the range. So remember, this is all a range from one end of the spectrum to the other, and where do you fall in that range? And then it shows you if you're high, here are the ways you're going to show up. If you're low, here are the ways you're going to show up. So
So,
remember, there's not a right or wrong. It's just who you are and how do we find a good role for you.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to really look at the words determined, persistent, direct. You know, if you're hiring a listing specialist, that's probably what you want. You want someone that's determined, that's not going to take no for an answer, that's going to be aggressive. If you're hiring an admin, you don't want them ticking your clients off every day. And so when you think about this, it's a range, high to low, but think about where do you want someone to be in each one of these categories? What's ideal?
Yeah, it's like same like sociability. So task oriented. Again, it's that person that has a job in the same desk for 30 years. They're task oriented versus people oriented, which means they want to talk to people. So again, you want to think about where in the range of sociability do you want your admin to show up? You probably don't want them super high over here as a 10, because then they're going to walk around the office talking to everyone all day and not getting anything done. Yet you don't want them completely task oriented where they don't want to call your clients. So you want them somewhere on that range where they're going to be comfortable to do their job and still be sociable. So this is why you're looking at both ends of the spectrum and determining where in the range for my position, which may not be the exact match as this, because maybe you tweaked your position a little bit, where on the range do I want it?
A good example of that is we recently hired 2 MCAs, and in one job description, that MCA role was a little bit more task oriented. There was just some more stuff that needed to get done. In the other case, we needed an MCA that was good at the stuff, but they could love up with the agents, because the staffing profiles are different in those market centers. And so I think that I always think about this from the standpoint of the high I personality that just loves people. There's an MCA that you and I know that's from Tulsa. She's moved on to another role, actually, now that I think about it, but she was a super high I MCA. And so that market center, she'd be bebopping around the office every day. She was almost like an assistant team leader. She knew everything about everybody. But it was hard to keep her in her office. It was hard to get the work done, but she was a super valued employee because she was the glue that held everything together, and she knew everything that was going on. And so again, it's just how do each one of these show up in terms of the behavior in your business?
Okay, so responsiveness, are they calm, steady, and patient, or are they going to be fast-paced and impatient, get things done quickly, let's wins us over. So think about that in terms of that structure. I think that's a big one for especially the administrative ones. Are they going to have a little greater tolerance for ambiguity and they're concerned with not concerned about it, or are they going to need some order? And so I think this is one of the ones that a lot of the agents struggle with their admin, especially if it's their first admin hire, because they don't have any systems. They're hiring, I'm hiring this admin to put these systems together, right? How many times have we heard that? But if they like order and structure, they want those already there. They want to have clarity on what they're supposed to be doing. So it's about really talking that through with them and being clear that if you don't have structure, you've got to make sure you can work with somebody who needs some structure and somebody who can create the structure to begin with. If they need it and you don't have it, they better have another skill that can create it.
Yeah, And I'm gonna go back on responsiveness also, because that's one that's big for me. When I see low responsiveness, I just know my natural behavioral profile, I don't work really well with that low responsiveness individual. And that's someone who oftentimes every task kind of takes its own, like they're all the same. And there's not that like snap prioritization of, hey, this is a fire, I gotta go put this out and I'll go deal with these other things. So I'm always looking at, are there other overriding factors there that would cause me to say this is still the right candidate, even though they're a little lower responsiveness? And sometimes, yes, there are. They've got a track record. They are, they've got the right other components that they can succeed at the role at a high level. But as an agent, I think most agents are pretty responsive. They want someone that when you say, I need something, they're on it and they've got it to you today, not 2 days from now. So watch responsiveness.
Adaptability is either whether they're independent and can just go with the flow and take charge and do what they want, or are they worried about other people's feelings? Do they want to accommodate them and make sure that they're, being liked and loving on people? Intensity, this is different than assertiveness or responsiveness. Intensive is how they're going to be when they're frustrated and they seek a more reason or logical result, versus hot when they're frustrated. Like, are they going to be right in your face, intense? And it's like what we talked about is kind of an internal. How are they vibrating on the inside? Are they really, really intense, or are they pretty calm, cool, and relaxed?
Yeah, and I think recognizing that these, again, they don't exist in isolation. They work together. So, I'm high assertive, high intensity. Austin knows that. So, I'm going to tackle something and people are going to know pretty quick what I'm thinking if there's an issue. I can think of a buyer's agent that I had that was low assertiveness, high intensity. And you could just tell, like, she was really, really good, but she always had this little bit of nervous energy. And she always was ready to like, get done with whatever you're saying. I'm going to go do something. And she just had that, but she was like, the clients loved her. Like she just would gush all over them, but she'd keep them moving. We're out showing, we're going. And so think about how those work together, not just in isolation.
Optimism, again, whether you're glass half full, glass half empty, that's the easiest way to do that in terms of optimistic behavior. So
But I also think it's important that you know your own level of optimism. We both have high optimism.
I was going to talk about that too.
You're going to talk about that too, okay?
It's okay.
So know your own level of optimism, and I'll let you continue.
Just later on, because it's like I started off when I told you guys I'm highly optimistic. You'll see on the next page that I am. And so one of the things that we do is we think everything's going to work out, and we're not looking at certain blind spots. So it's just understanding whether how optimistic are they and being reality of whether it's going to work with you.
So we had 7 of the behaviors. Now we have thinking.
So this is where they actually, the one thing that Keller did differently than the ABA is the ABA was all behaviors. Keller actually brought in an intelligence test to this.
Okay.
And so the first part of it is logical problem solving. And this is whether they can have a problem and go through it logically and come to a solution. Rapid problem solving. I'm gonna go through all of these and I'm gonna tell you how they work together. Rapid problem solving, which is whether you can make decisions quickly. Spatial visualization, which is that 3D image and able to see projects and things in 3D. And then vocabulary, how good are they on the phone? So one of the things I really want you guys to look for is, because again, these don't operate in isolation, right? And this isn't saying one thing or the other, but if you've got somebody that's a really high rapid problem solver, they score super, super high, but really low on logical problem solving, what do you think you're going to get?
They make fast decisions that aren't really thought about.
That's right. They're going to make decisions that might be wrong because they didn't think through it. And then guess who gets to clean up the mess?
Wait, you did what? Wait, what?
So I always say whenever, and by the way, it shows up. I've seen this on a couple people's KPAs. They went ahead and hired them, and then that's literally what they did over and over and over again. So you want to be looking for things like that, because that is also a little bit of that EQ that he was talking about. It's understanding when not to make a problem, not to make a determination on the problem and to go ask for help, right? Because, and maybe this is also if you have somebody that you're hiring that you see kind of falls somewhere in that range, you can be crystal clear on what your standards are. These are the things you can make decisions on. Anything else you have to come to me for. So you kind of see how using these things for each person, you're tailoring their behavior and their thinking with what you need in the position.
Heather, before you move on, you're
No,
okay.
don't be
Are
sorry.
any of these traits be considered a learned skill? And like,
Well-
oh, not gonna do that again.
With thinking, I think this is just intelligence. I think this is what it is. Behavior is the same way. It's the behavior you're born with. I do think there is some adaptive things that you do, especially if somebody is young. When they take the KPA, you'll see that maybe they showed up a certain way when they were younger, but they learned that was not working for them. And so over time, they adapted that, so they didn't do it anymore. Does that help a little bit, Jack?
Yeah,
It's nurture
Okay.
and nature.
I'm sorry?
It's nurture and nature,
Correct.
both.
But there are a lot of things that I will do today that I wouldn't dream of doing years ago and vice versa. So how do we know whether or not someone in this position has the wherewithal to grow into?
So that basically comes down to the validation process, and that's what a lot of the process is doing, is you're seeing if there's a gap there. When you validate it, maybe they would tell you, okay, I did show up like that when I was younger, but I don't do that anymore. Here's examples of what I do, how I've overcome it. So it's going through this process and asking the questions, because that's what you're doing. You're like, look, think of it as an onion. We're just peeling back layer by
So
layer.
we're basically looking at, what can you do for me today?
Well, this is just like yes and no.
Yeah, I see where you're going with that. So if you remember, I talked about the swing set going backwards and forwards. You're really looking at it with respect to the KPA. You are looking at, I've got a role and I'm kind of looking at, is this person a fit for this role today? And I'm always listening very closely. Like, I have 5 or 6 people in this market that I intend to be in business with. I have roles for them. They're at other places right now and they're happy as a lark where they are, but we will be in business with them likely at some point, because they've said that the trajectory that came out through the career visioning process, I know that they are not able to achieve what they want where they are. And so I know that there's going to be a point in time where they come back and knock. And, one of my really, really outstanding hires in Des Moines was the same way. We did the process. She was not ready then, but about, I don't know, it was probably like 2 years later, she showed up, the team meeting was starting, and I saw her walk by and I was like, what is she doing here? And, right before team meeting, she said, hey, remember you told me if I ever, was looking for a job, you were hiring. And I said, yeah. And she goes, well, I just quit my job. Will you hire me? I'm like, okay, welcome in. But, so you're doing both. You're having squid eye of where could I utilize this person? And I know that this is something we're both passionate about, is where could I utilize this person? And if I can't use them, who else around me is looking for someone? Is another team looking for someone? Is the markets that are looking for someone? Where are they at? But you're going to figure that trajectory out when you do, particularly the life journey portion. So if you've got a candidate that's going that far, you're going to figure out past, present, and future. Does that help? Somewhat? Okay, stick with that and we'll revisit that question.
Stick with us a little longer. We'll see if we can get you some
I
clarity on
suffer
that.
from delayed intelligence.
No. Here's the last thing I want to say is vocabulary is about language, but it's actually about EQ. And I said that, emotional intelligence is something to look for. This is really about understanding how they process ideas and leveraging visual or kinesthetic modes of thought versus being able to be quick to understand new ideas and concepts and leverage them in dealing with new experiences. And so it is about language, but it's about how you interpret that language and what you do with it. And so this one can be a little bit more complex.
Okay, so job match consideration. So this is my actual job match for the coach one that we put out. And so as you can see, here are the considerations, is it's a high match, so when you look at it again, remember, we're looking at the range. The gray part, if for those of you who have taken career visioning know, the gray part is the range of where they should fall. So if they fall in that range, then they're a match for that behavior. The top 3 that you're looking at, these are the most important skills you need in that position. So what you'll notice is for each position, those top 3 will be different because it's based on the role. So the role of the coach, what is most important is adaptability, assertiveness, and rapid problem solving. That's what they're looking for in a coach, because they need somebody that's gonna adapt to whatever gets thrown at us, that's gonna be assertive and not let them get away with not hitting their goals. And we have to be able to solve problems because we're getting problems every day thrown at us that we weren't expecting. So that's what I would say in the job match. So you can look at where they are. If they're green, that means they're within their range and they're a go. Intensity, sociability, and vocabulary are medium indicators of what is needed in that job role. And then the last 3 are logical problem, optimism, responsiveness, spatial visualization, and structure.
Yeah. And so to give some context of where we are in the process, because I said there's that one little box that kind of lives above step 1 that we don't really talk about, or it's kind of presumed. We're still in that first stage. So we've identified a potential candidate.
We haven't started validating yet.
We've sent them the KPA, we've given the instructions on how to take it. It's come back. We're still in the review mode. We're looking at what do we need them to do? Do they have the skills? What is their fit and where are the mismatches? Is the mismatch going to be an issue? Like in this case, you're a little off in structure, but that's coach is not one that you have to have real high structure. MCA, on the other hand, the MCA structure is over here. If we were here, by the way, that'd be a high, high, medium, or low. What's the word that I'm looking for? It's a critical trait. So like that mismatch would probably be red, and we'll look at what that looks like. But we're still in the process of thinking through how does this candidate show up? What's their behavior? How are they going to interact in the role? And is this something that matches what I need? And this is the part a lot of people skip, is they just send them the KPA, and the first time they've ever read it is into validation. And that's a problem.
And by the way,
So
don't get too excited if you see this hire. This does not mean that they're your hire yet. That just means, okay, I get a green light to go to the next step.
Yes, Austin.
So is it a bad thing that Heather's more optimistic than most coaches? That's what I'm
Well, we can definitely talk about that, and could be, because at the same time, I'm gonna believe you can do it whether it's real or not. So this is where my logical problem solving comes in, and I have to take it back to the numbers. How do we put together the plan? And that's where these work together in terms of it. So that's how you kind of have to look at it. Okay, they're really, really optimistic, but what are the other stop gaps that they have that will help them not be too optimistic in a certain situation?
Yeah, and so because it's a low impact trait, that's what I was looking for, the word trait. Because it's a low impact trait, it's not one that makes a lot of difference. But if that was a high impact trait for that role, boy, it'd make a lot of difference. So good, okay.
So now, the next page is where this is my lowest fit. Do not hire me to be your accountant, because I'm probably, I can do it. I mean, I have to know P&Ls, I do all that as a coach. I just don't want to sit behind a desk all day. I would want to poke my eyeballs out. Now, here's also where if you're to get something that is a low or a medium fit, this is where this page becomes vitally important. Because you want to pull it out and see, where are they a high fit? Where do they fit within the KWRA organization? Is this something that is going to work for us? So make sure, realize that these all work together and be looking at them together. So again, I planted this page up because what I wanted you to see is how you can see on this one, I've got 2 major reds in the high impact. In order to have a good job at this is logical problem solving, structure, and spatial visualization. The only thing, I'm not even on the rack for logical problem solving. I even am crazy over on the other edge. So the ones that are lower impact I'm closer to, So you could say, well, she's got more yellows than she does reds, but that's not really the importance. The importance is the first three. So keep that in mind too. But I wanted you to see how the range of structure mattered at both the high and the low. So you got to see both ends of the spectrum on this.
And again, this is where you do have to stay in curiosity. Mentioning the age, I just had someone that I verified the KPA, and there was a bunch of this on there. It did not match. And as we got into it, the candidate said multiple times, that's not like me. I used to be like that, like when I was graduating high school and when I was in college, but I'm not that way now. And then they could give example after example of that. And you're going, okay, this is interesting. I said, well, how old were you when you took this? And she said, I was like 22, 23. Okay, well, that was 4 years ago. I'm going, okay, so she's changed a lot. The behavior tends to still be malleable up until you're about 27, 28 years old. And it's really interesting when I go back and I look at my early disc profiles, I was a full-on D, I had no I had 0 S, I still don't have a lot of S, and I was a full-on C, and I was studying computer science. So, I wanted results and I was compliant, correct. Well, with age and time, that morphed, and I have a little bit of C, but I don't have a lot. I have a lot of D and a whole lot of I. It's like 99, 99 on the disc profile. And so look for signs, have they changed over time?
So is that a situation where you'd have them retake it?
So I'm glad you asked that question. That was one of the questions I was
just can't
hoping somebody would ask today.
Yeah.
So I get that a lot as a coach, as should I have them retake the test or whatever. So to kind of piggyback with what he said, most people's brains don't stop growing until after they're 25 years old. So if something is still growing and maturing, we can't expect it not to change at all. So that's when you do it. What my answer to, should I have somebody retake the test? Because especially if they're in their 30s or more, they should know themselves pretty well. Validate it. If they say, this is like me, this is like me, this is like me, then there's no reason to take the test again.
Okay.
Right? So people say, well, it's been 5 years since I took it. Well, validate it. If it didn't absolutely, like that situation you had doesn't sound like you, then you retake it. Otherwise, there's really no reason to retake it unless they didn't follow the directions and then take it properly.
Yeah.
Which again, wouldn't validate.
Right. A zebra never changes its stripes. It always has the same stripes. Regardless of where they are in their continuum, they're going to look the same. You're going to find signs that they were the same over time. Okay. So we've done all of our prep work. We've sent the candidate the KPA. We've reviewed everything. There's a couple things that are going to be after this slide that are still a part of the prep work that you want to review, and yet those also show up in how you verify the KPA. So when we talk about the actual KPA itself, plan an hour to an hour and a half. I usually block an hour and a half. I always make sure that I have uninterrupted space so everyone knows, don't bug me. Don't come knocking on the door and interrupting it, because that can break the psychological security of the space. So you want to make sure you block the time. You can do Zoom for this step, and I have had very, very good success with doing it via Zoom. At some point, you do have to meet the candidate, and a great example of that is I had a candidate that showed up to the first and second sessions. They knocked it out of the ballpark. The third session, I forget, I did one step via Zoom. The third session, when they showed up, they had like some clothing that was torn, and all of a sudden I started to get a sense, okay, this individual does not have a wardrobe because they're wearing torn clothes to an interview, or they just don't know to dress better than that. So I'm going, this is a very visual person in a very visible location. I'm going to have to take that into account. So you do want to make sure that you get with them. Read the consulting guide word for word. This is part of the benefit of this is your consulting guide says, tell Heather the following. And literally, of course, you don't want to make it sound like it's a script that says on a scale of 1 to 10. But just so, on a scale of 1 to 10, Heather, how accurate would you say each sentence is? And just read them.
And we'll do that live in a little bit too, so
Yeah.
you guys get to see what he's talking about.
And there's questions in there that allow you to delve deeper. And I have to tell you that I am sometimes shocked because sometimes I'm looking at the question And I go, man, I can't imagine they'd have an answer for this. And you ask the question, they're like, oh yeah, let me tell you about this time. You're like, wow, that's crazy. So read it verbatim, just read it, follow it.
And the other thing is on this too, is as you looked at the first page and you were doing your prep, there were things that you saw were mismatches. This is your opportunity to really figure out what those are and a little bit more about it. So where it says dig deeper on here, tell me more, give me an example of that.
Yep.
Down here, walk me through. You can also write some certain prompt questions that you might have had in there and ask. So don't be afraid to have this prep before as you're going through with them.
So when you go through and you're verifying that KPA, you're creating the psychological safety, you're setting them up for what that conversation is going to look like. As you get into it, there's going to be two really critical parts. Job consideration one is all the areas where the candidate is a match. And what you're looking for in that area is that they're verifying, yeah, that is like, yeah, that's me. Yeah, I show up that way. You're wanting to listen for the silence between the notes, but you're wanting to really pay attention to some of their stories and some of their examples that give you a picture of their trajectory. When you get to the second page, we have job considerations 2, which are areas of mismatch. How do you want to
Yeah,
talk
so
about that?
all of those, the first pages were all matches. So those are gonna be really easy because for the most part, they're probably gonna validate that really quickly. The second one are the ones that you really need to be concerned about because this is where there is a possible mismatch. So these are those yellows and possibly reds in here. And so this is where it's gonna say in the gray, it has the gray box, it says considerations. So in logical problem solving, it may say she spends too much time on simple problems. She may try to solve problems in a logical way, but a quick intuitive answer may be appropriate. So this is where you can say, so tell me a time that maybe you spent a little more time on solving a problem and it didn't benefit you. So that's where you're really looking at really getting to how is this gonna show up? This is the how in terms of it. So like, I know you guys asked the optimistic question. Go to the next page, please. Oh, you don't have that one. Okay, it didn't get in there. Okay, so under optimism, I'll just read it to you because I have it. It says considerations. She may at times be too lenient regarding people or situations. So this is where maybe if you were hiring me to be your coach, you may ask some questions about that and figure out what that looks like. Also is a highlight for your references. So this is how these all start tying together. If it says she may be too lenient requiring for doing that, when you go to the references of people that have hired me before, hey, can you tell me how did she show up right here?
And I think it's important to really note that this is also where intelligence and adaptive behavior comes in because Austin, you know, she's not too lenient. In fact, her coaching style is very direct and very like on point and you know, and she gets massive results. I mean, you have people that you've taken from new agents to an excess of 500 units in a very short period of time. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, and by the way, at home, she's not, you know, overly optimistic. And I mean, she is, and yet not overly, but I think you'll find that when you verify that appropriately, you'll find out how aware are they of their own traits. And I'm optimistic also, which is why I have written at the top of my, when I'm verifying, I verify KPIs on my iPad, it says stay in neutral. Because I just have to remember stay in neutral.
Don't fall in love with them too fast.
Yeah, don't fall in love until they're on board and they're through their first 6 months, you can't fall in love. So stay in neutral. So those are job considerations too. So let's go back to see where we are. We now have completed the prep work that sits above this box, and we're just still at step 1. We're still at step 1. I saw your face.
So what I've been thinking about through this whole thing is, if you recall the Cheers episode of Norm, when he had to fire everybody, and that's what I'm thinking. You know, there's so much stuff here, and you said at the beginning you have to master this process. So I'm thinking, okay, if I were doing this for the first time, I could be doing a complete disservice for this person that's actually looking for a job.
Well, I'd say yes or no, because you've been to a class and you're at this class learning. So are you gonna do it perfect? Are you maybe gonna miss some stuff? probably, but all you're doing, remember, is you're reading what they told you to say. So you're
And
probably
this-
not gonna mess it up because you're gonna say, so it says right here, say this. Or do
Yeah,
this.
and the question is, are you really stopping at the end of each process and going, do I green light this candidate? Do I still feel good? Or do I red light them? Or is there a yellow? And I'll sometimes say to Heather, hey, I got this candidate, I just verified KPA. Like, I like them in this space. I had one here just recently that I said early on, I'm like, there's something off. They say all the right things, they have the right pedigree, like everything matches, but man, something just doesn't feel right. She asked me a boatload of questions. Well, when it came time to actually make the offer, the kind of the crazy that had still been in the box came out. I made the offer and they were massively offended with the offer, and everything that I was not sure about came out in that one spot. And so I think you just have to trust the process, listen to your gut, and then rely on others, which is part of what we're going to be talking about here.
Can I
Coming up
share
next.
something? I was actually a medium fit for my role. Our disc profile is the same, and her coach told her not to hire me. But
And it was the
I
best
think
thing
I'm
she
doing
ever
pretty
did.
good.
Yeah.
I mean,
There you go.
but she did follow this entire process 100% all
There you go.
Was it the first time she did it?
on her first hiring.
There you go. Look at that.
I would say if you read through it a few times prior to actually
I think
facilitating
that's a
it,
very
it
great
gives
point.
you a lot of confidence because you know what's coming, and you can certainly mark in certain areas, okay, this is where I need to have this ready to draw this, or this is my stopping point.
Yeah.
So it's again about doing your prep work. It's understanding that there's the step before the step is the prep work.
Well, and
So
doing the whole thing, because she could have just stopped on that first page when she saw a medium and said, this isn't the one.
Right.
But because she went through each step and listened, and asked all the questions and, even the further along in the process, and when you're on the other side of this, it feels like a really long process too, so don't think that it's just a long process for you. But it makes sense, like after all of it, the whole process made so much sense to me, and exactly what you said about putting the right people in the right places. I mean,
So
it really
let me
does
ask you
guide
as a
that way.
candidate, so how did that make you feel? That she spent that much time going through this
Yeah, I
process?
was like, clearly she's invested in making sure she's finding the right person for the right role.
I
And
think
to
that's
get to
key.
each step, like, I'm at this step, or I have another interview, I'm going to meet her, it made me feel like I was really,
And I think that's the key to the whole thing, right? That's why we don't make it about us and we make it about the candidate. This, look at what you're creating, because now you have somebody that knows you really cared about them enough to do all of this, right? Because it's a lot of work. So regardless, so the
So,
next step is the thought process.
so
Who's done that? That's
yeah,
what I
go
want to
ahead.
know.
Have you guys, who's taken someone through this part of the process? So Austin has, okay, you have, okay, good. So thought processes, I call this 30 questions. What's interesting is you can verify the KPA. You may have a candidate that really understands themselves. They may not understand how they interact with the world around them. And so some of the questions like, how do you set a goal? How long would you be willing to fail at something before you succeed? These give you some really great points of clarity around what kind of a candidate you have. And some people say, oh, I give up pretty quick. Well, if you're hiring a team leader, that's probably not a good thing. If you're hiring a listing specialist, it's probably not good. And so I've had candidates that I thought their verification was spot on, and you get into 30 questions and you're like, this is different because it's looking at a different portion of the person.
So go ahead.
Go ahead, I was gonna say
Well, I
about
was
an
gonna say
hour and a half.
What you're really doing in this thought process, the why, not the what again, what you're really doing is you're looking at those mismatches that showed up in the KPA or any red flags that you personally got during the KPA, and you're tying it together right here. So as you're doing it, you're remembering what those mismatches are and how are they showing up here. So you're looking for patterns and looking for, is this gonna be an issue when I hire this person or not?
Also, give 2 or 3 specific instances and when you were trained well and poorly. I just made a hire that they had some very, very passionate responses on that. And I went, okay, it's a role that I would struggle to train that person. I actually need to bring someone in to train that individual. And so I hired someone else spend 2 to 3 hours a day, 3 days a week, training that individual, because they said, I want to become proficient. And if it takes me too long, I'm going to feel like I'm failing. That's not a good place for me. And so this has some clues as to what you're going to, as you onboard them, what you're going to do with them over time. Connect the dots back to the KPA for matches or mismatches.
And this also is, the first one is about themselves. This one is about really their EQ. How well do they interact with the world? That's what you're really looking at in this one.
So the next step.
So
in this
before we get there, is
process-
there any questions so far? We didn't stop and pause long enough for questions outside of that. Does anybody else have any questions? We still good? Okay, keep rolling.
Okay. Next one is going to be life story interview. And this is where what we talked about, that swing set where you're going back to go forward. We're going to go back and ask the question, take me back to either the first job that you had or when you graduated high school. And we're going to focus on what was the year, what was the event that happened. Was that an event, was that a high or was that a low? And I just put plus or minus on there. And then what did you learn from that period of your life? And this is called the professional biography. And yet what oftentimes starts to happen is there will be some personal things that will come in, and you as the career visioning specialist have to be real cautious because this can get into some dicey HR issues. Now, two things you're looking for is you're looking for the trajectory and the track record. And so most talent typically has had an obstacle or a setback or has to overcome something. And it's interesting, it's not that this is who they seek out, but if you go look at who works at Keller Williams Realty International, there's a tremendous amount of single moms, because single mom is when you've experienced that, you gotta buck up and produce results, and there's no excuses. And so that tends to manifest itself in an employee that has some very specific traits. So you're just going to go item by item, and you have to really kind of think about this, because sometimes they'll forget things like, well, you said you have 3 kids. Like, where did the kids come into this? Like, where were they at? And most of the time they'll offer those things up, but that also gives you clues into like gaps on their resume. Well, I went to be a mom for 2 or 3 years before I went back to the workplace. Okay, well, what'd you learn from that period of your life?
So if you're looking for this, the why behind all of that is basically you're looking for patterns. What are the patterns that have shown up in this person's life? Because they're probably going to continue happening. So if you have a person that doesn't stay at a job for every, that's like 6 months in, and if you're going through the specifics of it, they say, oh, well, this boss did this to me, and then this boss did this to me, and then this boss, it was never their fault. Guess what? 6 months from now, it's going to be your fault. They're not with you either.
Yep.
So you're looking at patterns of how they showed up. Did they become leaders in every position? Because that's a good sign that they're probably going to become a leader. Did they own their job? Those are the kind of things that you're looking for in this life.
Yep.
This life story interview. I call this the verbal resume. So they're starting out telling you, but they're telling you from their perspective, not just what's written out on a piece of paper and how and why it was important to them.
You do it on a flip chart.
Whiteboard.
A whiteboard. I tend to do this on a blank piece of white paper. I'll just get 5 or 10 pieces out of the copier. I just draw lines down, date, event, plus minus learned, and about the learned is about 2/3 of the column. And then I just go to the next page, go to the next page, go to the next page while I do that.
And again,
So,
the how tells you word for word how to do the life story in that job fit, even what to ask. So again, if you're feeling uncomfortable about it, just read through it, maybe practice with your spouse or do something like that.
So we've completed the life journey. So we've done the verification. We know their matches and their mismatches. We've compared them against the role. We've done 30 questions, so we understand how they interact with the world. We now have gone to the swing sets. We've gone all the way backwards to look at their trajectory forwards. And this is, I'll be honest with you, this is I think this is one of the most fun steps of career visioning, because this is where they get to dream and you get to get a picture of what their dream is. And the way that you set the motivational interview up is I do use a flip chart just like this. I draw it just an X, across the board. I do put their name up here in the top corner, and I'll say, so Heather, I want you to envision that we're sitting here 5 years from today, and I ask you how life is, and you say, life is unbelievable, like I didn't even know it could be this good. I want to talk about what has to have happened in 4 or maybe 5 quadrants of your life such that life is awesome. And the first thing that we're going to talk about is your job or your career. By the way, in your manual, it says job, and job can be a loaded word for some people. So I do use job or career because some people don't want job just over broke. That doesn't resonate with some people. Job and career. We're going to talk about money, financial. And then we're going to talk about 2 or 3 other areas of your life. Now, before we go on, Heather, let me just ask you, what are, maybe 2 other areas that would be important to you to be able to say life is great?
So why do you do this? Why is this important?
So you can understand them better and what their future looks like.
Yeah, what motivates them? And so why you do this part right here is because you're looking for what gets them out of bed every day. And if you can help them get there and maybe even get there faster, now all of a sudden you're creating a culture within your organization of people that are never going to leave you because they know you cared enough. And it's the whole Zig Ziglar thing. If you help enough people, you'll get everything you want. Same concept. So why you do this part is because you have to understand it. The biggest mistake I see on this one is they do this and then they put it in the folder and they forget about it. This should be you should have this in front of you for every person in your organization, because if you don't understand this at a really high level, they're probably going to leave you. So if we really want to keep somebody for a long time, I always think of Gary Keller. What Gary Keller teaches us is we have to make our world big enough so that their world fits in it. And so that means we constantly have to be growing and getting bigger, and we have to be making sure that we have their best interests at heart and we're helping them get their dreams. And sometimes that, that's the culture in and of itself. And like I said, I said all those things out. So you just want to make sure, again, that you understand them as a human being and you keep tying it back to that. So when they're having a hard time and they're not hitting their goals, you got to start having conversations around this. So you're not whipping them to do this stuff. You're actually showing them how if they do it, they're going to get what they want. And I think those are 2 different conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And I do review those quarterly, and I'm known to have them hanging in my office so that I'm looking at what my people's goals are, because again, you want to keep making your world bigger so that their world can get bigger. And that's a big part of the talent process. So now we've gone through step 2. So we are 4 of the 8 steps through. And
Hey, you guys are done with a lot of your portion of it. So
Yeah.
woohoo! Now you've interviewed them.
So let's
But we're
talk
not
about.
done.
Yeah, we're not done. We've got to go into the perspective conversation. So the first one is group interview. Heather, do you want to talk about that?
Before we go there, were there any other questions or ahas about the interview process itself? Because that's the big part, because that's where you're really digging deep about them and learning about them. Does that make sense? This is the shift now. This is where you move into what's called perspective. And this is the group interview. How the group interview should be set up is you're not allowed to go. Do not go to the group interview. You set it up so that if you have a big enough team, it's just the team. When I very first hired my first admin person, well, actually, it was when I hired my first buyer's agent, so all I had was an admin at the time. It wasn't big enough for a group interview, so I went and got a peer from the office that knew me really, really well and knew how I operated in terms of my business, and I asked them to do the group interview for me. So just realize you can go solicit help in the office for it. This should be off of outside of the office because you want this to be a different atmosphere. Now, here's what we're looking for. We made it through the interview process. They got a green light. Yay, I love them. I'm going to hire them tomorrow. Now you take them and you put them with your peers, your team. Now they're going to look for, what were you missing? What was the blind spots you had in this person that you fell in love that other people could see? You have a great example of this, Brian.
So yeah, I hired a buyer's agent on the team, and they had like they nailed everything. They nailed like track record, the whole 9 yards. They went through the entire process. I'm going, this is good. And I had them do the group interview. The entire team came back and said, she's not a fit. And I said, wait, whoa, what do you mean she's not a fit? They're like, we don't know. She's just not a fit. She's not one of us. Like there was a little bit of a sense that like she just didn't fit in with us. I'm going, oh, okay. Well, by the way, I'm glad I know that now because I haven't made her an offer yet. And what's interesting is that individual has gone on to be a leader. Like she holds a market center position. She was a good agent, but for some reason she just wasn't sticky with that group. And so every team has its own culture and its own kind of sense of who they are. And so she's not one of us. I thought that was an interesting statement.
So does everyone clear on what the group interview is and why? Because this is about the why behind what we're doing here. Okay, references, do them. I mean, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just want to go back to that. How do you feel about that now, though?
Well, so it's interesting. I think that, well, okay, I'll give you an answer to that. That's the reverse of that. I also hired someone that I probably should have had some more reservations about. However, the team was going, no, that's what we need, that's what we need, that's what we need. And I hired that individual and it was a train wreck. I mean, it was an absolute train wreck. And in hindsight, I ignored a few things because they were such cheerleaders for them. So I think you really have to think about in your organization, how are they going to fit? I think that individual could have worked out well, but I also think she probably didn't have a chance because the team just had some sixth sense that we're not a fit.
Can I answer that?
Yeah, go for it.
I think the biggest answer to that is that the team culture, the rest of the team had a different culture than he actually had.
Yeah, that's probably
So
true.
even though it was his team, the team that had kind of become created had a different mindset than his mindset. And so what he saw was a match wasn't gonna be a match with them. So if he were to hire somebody, even if they're highly talented and he brought them in, it was gonna cause more problems than it was gonna solve.
Yeah, I was like
So-
Austin, I'd been a team leader for 5 years and still had a team in production, and that team had morphed since I had started it back in the 90s. And so
They do.
they're like kids, they take on a life of their own.
So the answer is, you just have to kind of look at it that way. So would that person be, if he had a different team with different people, he'd probably hire that person. So that's the answer to this. So references.
Do you
Do
think it
them.
would be fair to say you hire like-minded individuals, whether they're the correct role fit or the non-correct role fit? So when you find the correct role fit, they still have similar characteristics and profile behaviors
Culture.
as far as culture, dialogue, thinking patterns that you as a
Synergy.
person.
I'm looking for synergy. And I think of you and Nicole as a great example of that. Because you guys are like brother and sister, kind of picking on each other and yet supporting each other. It's synergy. It's, yeah.
And it is interesting if you watch like certain people, Brian has a tendency to hire kind of people like him, the same personalities. You can go to his market centers and say, oh yeah, Brian hired these people. This wasn't a Brian hire, this one doesn't act like the rest of them. So it's just about creating that culture of whatever it is that you are and making sure that everyone fits together in the right puzzles. By the way, people that he would hire for this market center may not be a cultural fit for the other market center because that culture is different. Not bad or good, it's just
That just
different.
is.
And that's what you
The
have to
needs are
understand.
different. Yeah.
So again, on this references page, this is the page that most people want to skip because it's hard. Just read the questions, just have that piece of paper out, read them. It asks for 3. You may go ahead and ask for 5 people because a lot of times some of these people don't answer the phone for whatever reason. So if you want to ask for a couple extra than that, just so that you kind of at least had your bets on people that you can actually talk to. And remember, this is where, again, you're asking like that optimism question that you asked earlier. This is where you ask those kind of questions on how does she show up? Because anybody that's coached with me would tell you that that's not an issue in coaching. So that's why this page is important.
A couple of tips. Talent oftentimes has a job, like they're already in a role. Oftentimes it's not that they're unemployed and they're looking, although in this environment, there certainly are a lot of people that are unemployed and talented that are looking. So make sure that they've signed this, because if you were to call someone what you're doing is you're asking for references 3 deep. So you're asking the candidates reference all of the questions, and you're saying, who else do you know who would have also have worked with Heather that I should be talking to? And then that's when you get the grit. That's when the real story shows up as the second and the third level references. So ideally, in the old days, there were 9 references and you went 3 deep, which was 27. It was overkill. The idea here is that you get 3 and you go 3 deep, so you have a total of 9 total references.
And my OP would always tell the story about the fact that they were greenlighting a candidate, got all the way to this, went to the 3rd level and found out something that was a big deal breaker at that point. Because these people are probably their cheerleaders and their friends.
They know you're coming.
And they know that
Yes.
you're getting a call. The second group of people are gonna be the people that could or could not, but the 3rd deep have no idea about it, and they're probably gonna be a lot more authentic to the answer. So that's why, even though it would be easy to stop after the first 3, go ahead and do the rest of them. Again, this doesn't actually take that long if you're following the script. You can go through, this is a 5-10 minute call, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard a lot of people say you can delegate this step, and I'm going to say you can't. And because there's something magical about hearing firsthand what they say that doesn't translate into someone else's notes. So I do think you have to slow down and do this part yourself.
Okay, so the defense. So this is the other piece that most people don't do. So I'm just gonna be blunt. And so basically, as we're going through the process, you should be keeping it all together in one like folder or somewhere together. And so you're gonna get the full package, which has all the documents, all your notes, the KPA, the flip chart, everything you've done, and you're going to give it to somebody and you want to defend your hire. It's really important. I usually say if you have a coach, this is the perfect position for your coach for you. I say otherwise maybe your TL would be a good option. But here's what you want to know. You want to have somebody do the defense that has either knowledge of the role or really skilled knowledge of hiring to that role. Because what you want them to do is poke holes in things you didn't even think about and wouldn't have known. And we just actually had an experience on this where we had a defense with something that we'd already hired the person and whatever, and they actually brought some really good points that we were like, okay, thank you for sharing that. That's something we want to make sure that we cover with them or look over with them, because it's not our job. It wasn't a job we would do. So that was an interesting piece to that.
Yeah.
So I would say the defense is really about you defending them to somebody else, but then it's also about them showing you things that could possibly happen or mistakes that have been made in that role before.
Yeah, you got it. Okay, good. All right, defense. So we've defended the hire. They said we're golden. We make the hire. The next step, again, this is something I think gets skipped probably, I would say 95% of the time, is the expectations dialogue. And typically this happens either on the first day or typically after they've accepted the offer before they're starting. You're having a conversation with them. And the expectations dialogue goes through, I call this the house rules. This is, I've made a list of all of the things that have just freaking irked me in working with people. And these are the things that are my house rules that are just, that I know about myself and I know about my expectations and I know when I work with other people. And so the first one's honesty dialogue. It's on a scale of 1 to 10. If there was an issue, how honest do you want me to be? I always make sure I say 10 is brutally honest. And you kind of hope that they're like an 8 or a 9 or a 10, and yet 10 can be pretty direct, okay? And so you're establishing how are we going to work together? Win-lose dialogue. How does someone win with you and how does someone lose with you? Which is to say, how when you're working with someone, do you like feel better and better and better about them every day, or worse and worse and worse about them every day? And there are just things that are on my list that are things I know about myself that are like, those are my win-lose. This is how someone loses with me. Sensitive issues dialogue. If something should happen that's a sensitive nature, how would you want that to be handled? And I'm always shocked that people have, like, a lot of times they have very specific things. Don't call me out in front of a group take me aside, have this conversation, this is what I would want you to do.
Don't embarrass me.
Right, yeah, and then you review the job description, and I write my job descriptions as the one thing. So your job description usually has a whole bunch of stuff on it, but here's the one thing that matters more than anything else. Here's the key results area, so the 3 or 4 or 5 things that are the outcome areas that we want. And then here's all the other stuff that you have to do. And I think that it's important to get real clear on that, to ask, what are they concerned about? And I did make a hire here recently that they said, when we went through this, they said, there's actually a couple things on here I'm concerned about. And I said, well, okay, let's put a plan together about that to make sure that, and it turned out to be an extra class that they're taking just to make sure that they've got brushed up on. So those are the expectations dialogues.
Okay, so what are you guys' ahas and questions?
I think one aha, and you guys would probably agree, is when you do the expectations, don't be surprised that you don't sometimes have to redo the expectations after a first scenario has
Yeah.
popped up.
That's a great
It's a
point.
great tip.
Thank you for sharing that.
That's a great tip. Yeah.
Because that's when it comes down to reading their emotions and how they're reacting
Mhm.
to the conversation you're having. And maybe it's even having that sheet of paper ready so you can say, okay, we went over this, I'm showing up as an 8, or I'm showing up as a 10 for me. How are you feeling this is?
Well, that's a good point, is asking them, what does a 10 look like to you? Give me an example of that.
Mine was this is only, the KPI is only 20%. Like, I think a lot of, myself included, think like this is the be all ends all right here. Okay, hi,
Yep.
just there.
So do you see the why the other
Yes.
steps are so
Yes.
important?
Even though
This
I
is why
went
it's
through
powerful to
it,
me.
even though I went through the whole thing, it's just much more clear now.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Good,
Love
good,
that.
good, good.
I think, so I've had the privilege, if you guys sat through Gene Rivers teaching it, I love when Gene always says, this isn't a pass fair, this is like a chocolate and vanilla. And it's, so the battery, what charges, what depletes. Do you prefer chocolate or do you prefer vanilla? And this is gonna give us a good outline on if we're gonna put sprinkles on it or not. And to me, that was a great picture for me to be able to paint to somebody, because everyone is very specific. Do you like chocolate or do you like vanilla?
Mhm.
And there is no gray on that a lot of times.
Clearly vanilla.
Chocolate.
See?
I like chocolate sprinkles.
You can have all of that.
That's good. Good, good. Okay, good. Any other thoughts? We wanted to just open how we verify a KPA. So I know we're right at the end of our time, and we got about 10 minutes remaining. So we were going to spend a couple minutes on that. That would add value to you guys.
Perfect.
Okay, good.
So why don't you start with how, if you were to call, like, you're calling me, setting me up to take the KBA.
Stop sharing your screen.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Go ahead, stop share. Thank you.
There we go.
All right,
Thank you.
got it. Got
Okay,
it.
perfect. So now, this is how, when we call somebody and we want them to take the KBA, it's very important that you don't just send it to them. So you need to have a script. So I'll let you use the
Yeah,
script.
so Heather, I appreciate you having applied for the position of coach here at Keller Williams. And what I'm gonna do is, we have a process of really getting to know you, understanding your natural behavior. Everything
I
okay?
think you have me pinned on yours.
I have you pinned.
I
Let's
think you
unpin
need to
you.
unpin me.
So let's do that, and let's just
Oh.
go pin the video. How about that? Okay, good.
Thank you.
So, and I will see if I can just shut this off so we're not looking at 3 versions of myself, because that's a little scary. Okay, I don't know why it's not. So Heather, I want to say thank you for applying. Let's see, here we go. So I'm not gonna go back, but we'll just do that. So I want to say thank you for applying. At Keller Williams, we have a
We're
process
gonna
that
sit
really.
there though.
You are,
Okay, yeah, or we'll do it here. At Keller Williams, we really have a process of really understanding who you are and really matching you with a role that is going to be great for your natural skills and abilities. So I'm going to send you an assessment, and that assessment is, you're going to get a link. By the way, it usually goes to spam, so just watch for it. It says your assessment link is attached. What I'd like to do is I'd like to have you take that. Now, here's the thing. This assessment is going to take about an hour to complete. Are you okay with that?
Sure, yeah,
Okay.
that's fine.
Okay, good. So a couple things just to make sure that your assessment goes well. I want you to make sure that you take it, first of all, on a desktop and not like an iPad or a tablet of some type. Does that work for you?
Yeah, no, I can take it on my computer. No
Good.
problem.
And I also want you to make sure that you take this at a time when you're really fresh. So that's like either early in the morning or at some point in the day when you've got an hour to completely focus with no interruptions and you're fresh in the day. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, perfect sense.
Awesome. And then lastly, because I know that it affects the outcome sometimes, don't take it after you've had like a glass of wine or the end of the day, something like that, because I want you really in your natural state. Is that good?
Okay, no problem.
Awesome,
I'll
that's
take it in the
fantastic.
morning.
Now, Heather, the one last thing I want to leave you with is there's going to be 6 sections on this assessment. By the way, it's not a test. There's no right or wrong. 3 of those are timed and they're designed that you can't finish. So I don't want you to take it and then be worried that you failed because you didn't get done. Is that okay?
Okay,
Awesome, very good. Well, I'm gonna send you the link. I'll text you when I've sent it, and if you'll just let me know when you take it, send me a text or an email, let me know you took it. We'll watch for the results from the consultant, and then we'll go from there.
okay.
Great, awesome.
Thanks. So do you guys see how different that is and just setting it to them? So
What
you're
was your-
setting them up to succeed?
What was your biggest aha?
We were explaining the steps, what's going to happen, what you're gonna do, instead of just saying, I'm gonna send you over a test to take.
So
You
my,
set the expectations and
so personally, my biggest aha was oh my God, I got nervous, I was running out of time, and I just started skipping. And his exact statement was, 3 sections of these are designed not to be completed in the time allowed, so you will run out of time. And I think that was a big aha for me, because as people, we get nervous, like, oh my goodness, I'm falling behind. I need to start click, where they are designed that you are not going to finish them in the time allotted.
And I can give you the opposite of that. I don't know if any of you guys noticed that my structure was really low.
Spatial.
I mean, my spatial was really, really low. Well, it's because when I got to that point on that exam, I was so frustrated. I just started clicking through it. I didn't actually take that test, which is why I failed at it.
That's funny, because I circled that on yours. I'm like, that really surprised me.
Well, and the funny thing is, and this is why the validation is important, because if we get to that part, I don't know if we will or not today, the validation is my job before I was a real estate agent was I was actually a space planner and furniture designer. So I was trained to go in and look at a space and be able to do it. So I'm actually very good at spatial visualization. I just was so annoyed with that part of the test that I actually clicked through it because my high D kicked in. So that's again why the validation is important, because then I would have told him, oh, well, I actually have this job. I'm actually really good at that part. I just didn't like doing it on the test.
That's funny, because I knew that, and I'm like, what in the world?
So you knew I had that.
Yeah.
So why don't I do this? Why don't I just, let me just tee you up for how you would start the actual KPA verification, and we'll close with some questions and ahas. Would that work? And we'll do just a little tiny piece
Let's
here.
do, you guys can kind of, if you want us to keep going, let us know that you want to keep going if you need to go a couple minutes over.
So first of all, when you're setting up that verification, you really want to make sure that you're in a spot, ideally not across the table from them. You want to be kind of next to them. So I'll usually sit at the end of the table, put them kind of over here. I typically will try to situate myself in a place where I can see if we're going to be interrupted. I don't like someone coming up by the door behind me where they're then looking, so their back is usually to the door. We've always make sure they have water, because even if they say they don't want water, they will drink the water when it's there. So just make sure that they've got some beverage.
Especially after an hour, they get thirsty.
Yeah, and they get nervous, frankly. And so Heather, I'm really excited to go through your verification today. And so you took the KPA, and that the results of that went to the consultants, and the consultant has created a profile of your natural behavior. And so what I want you to know is today is all about you. So this is going to be really easy. This is about understanding your natural behavioral tendencies. And it's really important, Heather, to know that behavior is neither bad nor good any more than the color red is bad and the color green is good. Red is red, green is green. So our natural behavior is just how we're wired. It's our natural wiring. And what we're looking for is we want to put you in a role where you have great fit with anything that you're doing, so you wake up every day and you love what you do. Is that fair?
Okay, yeah, that sounds good.
Awesome.
By the way, remember, they're really nervous when they're taking this part of it because they're thinking that there's a pass-fail. So that's why when he's saying there's no good or bad or whatever. And at the end of the day, we just want you to walk away with a really clear understanding of who you are and your natural behaviors.
Yeah.
So I think that's another thing, is just remember, part of it is helping them come to ease, because they're thinking that they could say something wrong and you're not gonna hire them.
Yeah, right. The next thing that I would say in that dialogue is now, Heather, because I know the human tendency is we tend to be kind of modest, or we're sometimes not really willing or ready to celebrate ourselves. For the purposes of this next hour and a half, what I'd like to do is like you to just take your modesty and put it in your back pocket. So when we go through this and validate this, there's going to be some very, very positive things in here. And to the extent that it's accurate, I want you to be willing to say, yeah, that's me. Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I am that way. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's great.
Awesome, fantastic.
So by the way, he's setting it up so that they feel comfortable, like they're gonna walk away happy, right? He's already making them feel good.
And then what we're going to do is we're going to do what we call verify, which I'm going to read a series of statements. If it's a really big paragraph, I'm probably going to break it down sentence by sentence. If it's a small paragraph, I may put it all together. I'm going to ask you for each sentence or smaller chunk, on a scale of 1 to 10, how accurate is each statement?
Okay.
10 is, that's exactly who I am. 1 is, I have no idea who that is, and you get to pick what your scale is in between.
Okay.
Now, if it's not a 10, or if you hear a word that doesn't really resonate with you, I want you to know it's okay to stop me and we will edit. This is less about what the consultant said and more about editing this to make sure that we really have it accurate, so that when we're done, this is really a reflection of who you are.
Okay.
Fantastic, great. So Heather, we're gonna get started here. The first area that we're gonna talk about is assertiveness. And
Okay.
on a scale of 1 to 10, how accurate would you say each sentence is?
Okay.
Heather is a highly aggressive and competitive individual, and she enjoys being in control.
That's a 10.
That's a 10. And by the way, sometimes people will say yes, and I'll just take yes to be a 10.
Okay, fair enough.
She expects things to go her way, and she is willing to take substantial initiative to achieve the results.
I'd say an 8 or a 9 on that one.
Okay, 8 to 9. Okay.
I don't like the sentence, she expects it to go her way.
Okay.
Because that makes it sound like there's only one way of doing things.
Okay. So is there a word you use instead of expects?
I don't know if there's a word I would use instead of expects. Maybe, and I think it would be dependent upon if I was in a leadership role or a non-leadership role. Because I don't think you would expect it to go your way if you're not in a leadership position.
Okay, so it's dependent on the role.
I would say that's probably true.
Okay.
And then I don't just disavow other people's opinions. So they may have a good opinion that maybe would change my view.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm noting all this on here. Okay, good. So that was an 8 or 9. It says Heather tends to exhibit a rather dominant style, and she's comfortable exercising the power of her authority.
Again, that sounds really harsh in that I am comfortable in a leadership position, but I don't know that I would say I'm 100%. I would say I'm overly dominant. If I'm super confident that what I'm doing, I've learned over time, then I may be more that way, but I'm also bendable in terms of if other people bring me a good solution to something.
Okay, very good. So if we change that word dominant to a bendable style, on a scale of 1 to 10.
I don't want to say too bendable though, because I do have my beliefs. Like
Okay.
You can't tell me, just because you want something doesn't mean it's true. You can convince me
Okay.
that it's true, but I'm not going to just bend for the sake of bending.
Is that a firm style?
I would say firm's probably
Okay.
maybe a little more fair.
Okay. So if we change that to firm, would that be a 10? On a scale of 1 to 10, how accurate would that be?
Will you reread it that
Yeah.
way?
Heather tends to exhibit a rather firm style and is comfortable exercising the power of her authority.
I'd say that's true.
Okay, good, awesome. Now, breaking that, she told me as we went where the misfits were. So I would just go back and say, okay, so you got a 10, an 8, a 9, we edited that. Overall, how would you rate the accuracy of that paragraph?
I would say that's a 10.
That's a 10 now. Okay, good. So tell me, Heather, what really makes that a 10 for you?
I think it probably describes how I show up pretty well.
Okay, so this is just how you naturally show up.
Mhm.
Curiously, how's your ability to take action given you an advantage over others in positions that were similar to yours?
What do you mean by that?
Well, so think about your ability to take action, because this said that you have an ability to take action. I'm just curious, give me some examples of how your ability to take action has given you an advantage in your career.
Oh, well, I'd say as a real estate agent, it made all the difference because I was willing to do what other people weren't willing to do. And when I saw something needed to happen, I did it. I didn't sit around and wait for somebody to bring something to me. I mean, it is like, we talked about in my life story, or when we talk about it. I had a job as a furniture, just space designer and furniture manager, but I didn't like being there because I was waiting for people to come to me. I liked the ability to go out and get business because then I can control my future.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so control your future, okay? And by the way, Heather, as we go through this, I may take some notes and there may be some silent space. So if I'm writing, just feel free to continue adding.
Okay.
And out of curiosity then, you said you were willing to do what others weren't willing to do. What were the results?
Well, the results were I sold 100 houses by myself with just an admin team.
Wow. How'd you feel about that?
I was pretty proud of myself for doing that. I'm not
Okay,
gonna
good.
lie.
Okay, good.
I set a goal and I achieved it.
Okay, good. On occasion, being very proactive can be a challenge if others are more laid back. If this has ever happened to you, how did you handle that?
I'm not gonna lie, that one's pretty rough for me
Okay,
because if people are laid back and I want to keep charging forward. So I just have to use my emotional intelligence in those situations and realize that sometimes that you have to work with the team and it's not just about you. Unless moving forward was more beneficial for all of us, then I would convince them that they needed to move forward.
okay, great. Is there an example that comes to mind of that?
An example that comes to mind of that. Well, kind of an example. Okay, it totally doesn't have to do with work, but I was in Austin, Texas one time and it was pouring down rain and it was me and three other people. And apparently 2 people had umbrellas and they were just kind of slowly judging the rain and whether or not you could clearly see you're going to get wet regardless. So I just grabbed the umbrella and started running. And so everyone just had to kind of run along with me. And we got across the street pretty much in the same state that everybody else was, maybe a little drier because we ran instead of walked. That would be my example.
Okay, got it, good. And so I would note that. And so then we go to the next one. So Heather, again, on a scale of 1 to 10, we're going to talk about problem solving.
Okay.
And now we're just going to read each one sentence by sentence. And so that's the process that we would go through. Now, the one thing that I will say is as you get to the traits in isolation, the one thing I actually forgot to say as we started that off is that we're going to start out with individual traits and then we're going to start to add them together. And then at the end, we're going to do the behavioral overview, which is kind of the whole enchilada of how all your traits come together. And so I'm setting that up. As you go through job considerations 1 and 2, really take time to dwell on those. As you then get to the sentences, the paragraphs in operating style, you can move a little more quickly through those, read those because typically if everything is validated correct up to that point, then they're going to be like, yes, that's me. Then I slow back down again when you get to the descriptive review, because you really want to make sure that you edit some words and figure out what are the hot buttons. And I think it's important to remember the one thing we did not say is words only have the meaning that we associate with them. And so, sometimes a word like assertiveness might come across.
Yeah, it sounded like I was being very authoritative. And I was like, I didn't like that. But
Right, yeah. And so you have to remember that if they don't know a word, just pull out the dictionary on your phone and look it up, because sometimes there's a word in here they don't know. Sometimes you do have to rephrase a question, so be willing to try to stay as close to the question as possible, but also recognize that there may be words that are charged words. If if this isn't the case in your case, but if mom or dad were highly driven individuals, and that came at the price of the kid not getting attention, then when it says that you're a driven individual, they might go, no, I'm not. Driven's a bad thing. That's not me. Other people will be like, yeah, I'm darn tootin', like I'm driven. I know that creates abundance, so I've got to drive to go make something happen. So remember, those words can have different meanings depending on your paradigm and your perspectives. So good. Thank you for that.
You sure? We'd never done that, so that was I never actually validated my KPA before, so it's funny. So what were your thoughts or ahas or questions that you have from that?
It's reading a script for script.
That's a great point. Just follow the script.
Follow the
Like
script.
he meant his own, but he was reading it, he was looking at it, being cognizant that he was looking at it as he was saying it, so he wasn't ad-libbing.
That goes to your point about if you've never done it before, if you're just following the script.
Yeah, so what was going through my head, several things. First, when I did the KPA, I did not want to hear the results because I thought, oh, well, what if I'm not a fit for this career? Now what do? I go try to find something else.
Right.
Secondly, the wording of the questions, I really feel, if somebody says, ask me if I'm assertive, I don't like that word. So to me, the way the questions are asked, and I think going back to what I said before, it all comes down to the individual asking
Yes.
the questions and how they're.
Well, and just remember, it's like you said, if there is a word that is a charged word for them, then just take a word that's a synonymous, that's the same meaning, and start using it. And I've had to do that in an entire KPA before, where they had the same word pop up over and over, and they did not like that word. So I just used another word that meant exactly the same thing, and they're like, oh yeah, that's me. I was like, well, that's what this just said, but okay. So I just changed the word because it made them feel more comfortable. So
I guess the point I'm making is there could be three of us interviewing the same person, and our interpretation of that person could be totally different. And then are we doing?
well, it could be because of your culture too, right? It could be, do they fit in with you? Maybe this person isn't like us, like they're, not one of us type scenario. So it's not a good or a bad. It's again, do you have synergy with that person? Maybe you didn't have synergy with that person.
And all the other thing too is if I'm doing it for the first time and you've done it 15 times, there's things that you just automatically.
Well, so that's a great question. This is my recommendation as always within the market center. Go find 4 or 5 people that you want a KPA and go through that and let them do the same for you. Or go practice on someone somewhere else. Because if you spend just a little bit of time doing it, your proficiency goes up. And the other thing is pick people that exhibit the characteristics that you like or that you want to bring into your world. And so if if someone, talent has its own talk, its own verbiage, its own kind of frequency that they vibrate at. And so if you go find talented people that are already doing something else and you go through that KPA verification, you're going to start to get squid eye for, oh, this is what they sound like. This is how they talk.
Practice makes perfect.
Well, the other thing too is that if you're just an example, if you're hiring for an admin, you have to have the job description first.
Yes.
Before you even.
This is why you should
Do
start
anything.
now. This is why, like I said, start with that list and having what it is. So if you have, the more clarity you have on that, more clarity you'll have on what you need, what to look for, the missing pieces.
Yeah.
And
Good.
your expectations too.
Yeah.
That
Yes.
because it's hard to, when you're first hiring your first person, you don't know what your expectations are.
Yeah. And I find a lot of people hire down as a result of that. In other words, they're like, oh, I'm going to be a fraud. They're going to know I don't know what I'm doing. And so I'm going to hire someone that isn't going to figure that out. When in reality, you want to go hire massive talent because they'll bring you up. But I think a lot of people in their first hire down is for that exact reason.
I was always trained to hire somebody that knows more than you, because that way they make you look good.
That's
There you
right.
go, especially in a
Bingo.
position that you're not good at anyway, right?
Yeah, bingo.
I'm gonna guess everyone in this room is probably not a good admin.
No. Good.
Thank
Any
you for
other
that.
parting
Great.
thoughts, ahas?
Any other questions from the Zoom world?
Any questions? Derek, LA, anyone? They're saying no.
Okay, perfect.
Guys,
Thanks,
thank you for your
guys.
time. We appreciate you being here. Go figure out who your next hire is and go practice this process. Thanks, guys.